Hey everybody, welcome back. This is the last installment of the cutting board series. We're going to go through handholds and juice grooves. We're going to use this jig I made in about 45 minutes to make the juice grooves. So if that sounds like something you're interested, stick around. It's comprised of a 3/4 inch piece of MDF. I chose MDF because it's the most stable. I am in a climate controlled workshop, mildly climate controlled, I'll say. So I don't have to worry about movement too much. But if you want the jig to last a long time, I would suggest MDF or a hardwood plywood with a reputable brand if you can. After you get your MDF cut out, all we did was created some fences for a router base to ride against. In my case, I custom made these for a specific plunge router that I use. If I ever got a different router, I may have to adjust these or rebuild the fences themselves. But what I've got is I've got two fences, this one and this one, that are statically set. They do not move. Those are my square reference sides. Now, that doesn't really matter because you can kind of move everything the way you want it. But I chose just to go ahead and mount those and make sure they were square. I squared them off the outside edge that I knew was square. So when I put my boards in there, I know that they should all be square. And then once you get your boards in there, this way, we can just slide all the various pieces. No, we're out of room. We're out of room. That's a good test case there. So let's try. That's what you get when you try and make something to work for several different things. All right, so we can do it in this orientation and make her work. So obviously you can see I struggled there just a little bit. That's because I made this for a very specific size of cutting board and did not take the time to make sure that it would accommodate several different sizes of boards. Probably what I'll do in the future is add a couple more of the T-tracks in various places, and then make a couple smaller fences for these two sides so I can accommodate basically any size board on here. And that's the key to this sort of thing, is basically regardless of the type of board that you have, or the size rather, you could put it in here and still get the same result. One thing I will mention now, looking at this, I also did build this based off of a certain height of cutting board. This is not that height. That was 1.25 inches to 1.5 inches. So at the moment, my star bits or my star knobs are actually sticking up above the top surface of this cutting board. So that is, if you were to run your router through there, you're going to run into that. So that is something to think about. So what I'll do for today, again, this is prior planning, is I will put a washer and a regular nut on there to bring it down to the correct level. All right, so we fixed that issue. I think they probably make a shorter star knob. These are fairly deep, and they don't need to be very deep at all, to be honest. I could even probably make my own out of a couple pieces of scrap wood and make them really thin, just embed a nut into them or whatever. I'll figure something out for that. and let you know what I did it down in the comments or in the description of the video later on. The distance where your groove will be placed is going to be determined by the size of your router sled, and the distance of these bottom pieces that are butting up against here. In my case, I think I believe it places it about a 1/2 inch in around every edge. I did some tests and I thought that looked the best. You'll see this little bit setter here that I've put in here. Essentially what I did is I decided how deep that I wanted that juice groove to be. And once I dialed that in, I just brought the router in and plunged it down to where that depth that I liked. That way now I can use that to set the bit so I always get the desired depth on my juice groove. I'm going to essentially just plunge this down and then lock my depth so that I can set my depth stop appropriately. It was probably a 30-minute build, 30 to 45 minutes by the time you cut the MDF down, cut out the grooves. I didn't bother squaring off the front of those grooves for the T-tracks just because it doesn't matter. It's a jig, it's functional, it doesn't have to be the prettiest thing. Sure, I could have chiseled it out square and I could have made this out of solid walnut or something like that, but it's not necessary. So we'll hop in and try it out. All right, so we're just going to plunge the router down and run it around the edge. It's important to keep it up against the fence and make sure you're going the right direction. In this case, you can see the arrows on the board. I'm actually going the wrong direction. This is actually called a climb cut. It depends on your skill level whether or not you want to do that. There's some situations you would want to do that, some that you would not. We can get into that in another video. But in this case, I was going the wrong direction. And because of the gap between the router and the fence, you will also want to make sure that you're putting pressure towards the inside of the board. Otherwise, the router's going to want to tip towards the edges and you'll get little gouges in your juice groove. Now, if you look here, that is the result of not riding the fence. I let it walk from the fence a little bit and I had to bring it back. So I'll show you now how I'm going to attempt to remedy that. All right, so what we did is we took a scrap piece of walnut that I had from offcuts from making these cutting boards. It's about 3/16 or so wide, and we just clamped that up against the fence, and we'll do that for every edge, but this will allow us to offset it more towards the center, and it will cut through those areas where we walked away from the fence. The important part here is to not repeat your mistake again. Don't let it walk from the fence this time around, otherwise you're going to be in a constant shuffle of spacing it inwards, and then your whole board is a juice groove. So just be careful with that. I find it easier to turn the jig around so that I'm always either pulling towards me or pulling one direction or the other in front of me, left to right. That seems to be the easiest way for me to do it, to make sure that I am actually able to keep it along the fence. Finally, we're just going to give this some love with the sandpaper. You'll want to get all the grooves, all edges of the groove, and really work the corners, and then make sure you soften the edges on the both edges of the groove so that it's not a sharp edge there. All right, now that we learned about juice screws, we can move on to handholds. In my first or second video in the series, I'm not sure which, I did a basic handhold on this. Actually messed up on this, that's why it's beveled on both edges. But handholds are a personal preference. Some people don't care about them. I like them just because it gives them a little bit of visual appeal. I like the shadow lines that it creates against the table and things. So you can do it in many different ways. The first of which is this, which I already showed in the first video, where you just bevel your table saw to 45 degrees and make a cut. That's easy peasy. You can take care of that, no problem. And you just do that around all four edges. The top edge on this one, I made a boo-boo, so I had to do it on the top edge as well, just to get rid of the boo-boo. But yes, I'm 12. I use the word boo-boo. So yeah, that's one option. Another option is to just soften the bottom edge and put some feet on it. That will raise it up above the table enough to where it makes it easier to get to. And the last option is going to be an inset handhold. And I'm going to show you how to do that now real quick. It's fairly simple. You do need a router. I'm using a plunge router here. And you do need one with a guide on it. The guide is going to help you keep it centered on your board when you're cutting it out. So I'll bring you in and we'll show you how to do that now. All right, notice here we are using a wider bowl bit on this. This does happen to have a bearing on it, but since we're not going the full depth of the bowl bit, it doesn't matter in this scenario. You do want to try and take several passes. The more passes you take, the less likely you are to get burning. And just like the juice grooves, you need to make sure to keep that flat on your material that you're cutting, especially on a narrow piece like this. It's going to be very easy to let that tip both ways, and depending on how deep you make that juice groove, it actually could cause the router to jump and take off out of your hand. So be careful with that. But you just plunge it in a few times and run it back and forth. You do want to pre-measure and make sure that you get your starting and stop points figured out. That way it's even on both edges. But that's all there is to that. There you have it, handholds and juice screws. Now you could do the juice screws with a CNC. I do happen to have one of those, but I wanted to show everybody that you could do it with just a simple jig. But I want to take the time to thank anybody that actually made it through the whole series. I hope you're able to learn something. I know I did, and have a laugh or two along the way. So we'll see you next time for who knows what. Later.